In a special address to a virtual World Economic Forum meeting, Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong says that extraordinary measures used during the pandemic to support economies cannot last forever.
F&B operators under fire for allegedly breaching safe management measures. 2 will be charged, 4 ordered to close and 6 fined.
With just 6 months until the start of the Tokyo Olympics, there are fresh doubts whether the Games will go ahead.
You're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Koi.
I'm Harianto Dimana. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
In a special address at the World Economic Forum Davos agenda, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said if governments around the world are to tackle COVID-19 coherently, international cooperation and multilateral efforts are critical.
This as countries come under pressure to adopt protectionist and nativist positions as the pandemic rages on with mutations and uneven vaccine uptake.
Mr. Lee also shared that unprecedented emergency spending and budgetary stimulus has kept the economy afloat, but it cannot be sustained for the long run.
Only unprecedented levels of emergency spending and budgetary stimulus have kept us afloat, providing a lifeline to companies, workers, and families. Central banks have played their part to prevent financial systems and global capital markets from seizing up, unlike in previous crises. These extraordinary measures cannot be sustained indefinitely. In fact, spending packages are already tapering off. But hopefully, as vaccination becomes more widespread and we make headway suppressing the virus, COVID-19 restrictions can be progressively eased and economies will rebound.
Well, Mr. Lee also underlined the importance of global collaboration beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, how fighting it mustn't allow the world to lose sight of other major global challenges like climate change.
I think we have to respond to our domestic issues in our own ways, but it is necessary for all of us to put a certain broader view ahead of us and to work together to tackle these common problems. Because otherwise, if it's a scramble of each country for itself, I think we're all going to come into serious trouble. And it's so for pandemics, it's so for climate change, it's so for economic recovery, it's so for a stable global security order.
Singapore will host the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in May. It will be the first global leadership event to address worldwide recovery from the pandemic.
Well, earlier this morning, PM Lee received his second and final dose of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine at Singapore General Hospital. Senior staff nurse Fatima Muhammad Shah, who administered the first dose, did this second one as well. PM Lee wrote on Facebook after that the jab was quick and painless and that he felt fine.
In its daily update last night, the Health Ministry said more than 113,000 people have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Out of these, there were 432 adverse event reports linked to symptoms like fever, headache, fatigue, which are generally associated with all vaccinations. Most of these symptoms resolved on their own within a few days. MOH said there were 3 cases of an anaphylaxis, but all of them recovered and were discharged from the hospital after a day's observation or treatment. All 3 had a history of allergies, but none had a history of anaphylaxis, which would have precluded them from receiving the vaccine in the first place.
Well, 24 new COVID-19 cases confirmed today, all imported and had been placed on stay-home notice on arrival in Singapore.
This is the 7th day in a row that no new cases in the community were reported. Now, more details will be released tonight.
2 F&B operators, Mark Enterprise and Kim's Place Seafood Restaurant, will be charged next Tuesday for allegedly breaching safe management measures. Mark Enterprise had also allegedly continued operations on July 18th, despite having previously been issued an order to close. Kim's Place Seafood had allegedly allowed gatherings of more than 5 people split across multiple tables. It also allowed karaoke activities on its premises in September last year.
Separately, 4 other F&B outlets were ordered to close. They are Xiao Yao Ge in Jurong East, Main Entrance at Sago Street, Kilni Kopitiam in Lucky Plaza, and Tian Ya Hao Chiao KTV at Aliwal Street. Another 6 outlets were fined. A further 131 people have also been fined for flouting COVID-19 rules, including gathering in groups larger than 8 and mingling in parks and beaches.
In 6 months, on July the 23rd, will we see an opening ceremony at the Tokyo Olympics?
Well, your guess is as good as ours. Organisers say the Games are on solid ground to proceed despite growing debate over its feasibility.
Well, sports correspondent David Lee writes that in deciding whether the Olympics should go ahead is a delicate balancing act.
Choosing to go ahead will mean risks in public health and safety. Recent public opinion polls have shown that about 80% of people in Japan want the Games to be cancelled or delayed again, over fears the influx of athletes will worsen the pandemic.
Well, that's understandable, right? But a cancellation or even a closed-door Games would have serious implications for Japan's tourism, hospitality and aviation sectors.
Well, David is here to share more. We're also joined by Assistant Sports Editor Rohit Brijnath. Hi guys. Now, David, we know the Olympics to be the world's biggest sporting event held once every 4 years. Now, for most athletes, it's the target that they work towards. So in cancelling it, what are we losing there?
Right, the short answer is a lot. You look at the Japan Organizing Committee and their government who have pumped in billions for this extravaganza, and the country itself that was looking for a boost to the aviation, hospitality and tourism sectors after already being hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. Then you have the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, which basically relies on the Olympics, especially the Summer Games, for rights and broadcast revenue, again to the tune of billions. The trickle-down effect would be that broadcasters and sponsors who have already paid for the rights will be sweating and furiously checking their contracts for cancel clauses or their insurance if anything can be done to get back the money. And even if they do so, there's this missed opportunity cost involved as broadcasters now face dead air over the period. On the sports front, the National Olympic Committees who rely on funding from IOC to carry out their sports programs and development plans will inevitably suffer, although it's said that the IOC has a reserve fund of more than $1 billion, which it can activate if need be. Then, of course, the stars of the Olympics, the athletes themselves, they will lose the platform to shine. The Olympics is, such a coveted event, also partially because of its quadrennial nature, and many who have worked hard for 4 years for this moment, only to see it possibly vanish through no fault of theirs. Research shows 3/4 of all summer Olympians go to just one Olympics, so this is really all or nothing for them. Other groups that will lose out from the scrapping of this year's Olympics are the debut sports. Karate, skateboarding, surfing, and sport climbing are all set to make their first appearance at the Olympics, and they could miss out on the opportunity to show the world what they are all about. And the push for gender equality as well. Tokyo 2020 was set for a record 49% female participation. That may also be put on ice if the Olympics are scrapped.
Right. Well, David, you definitely covered a lot of ground there, but Rohit, do you have anything to add to what David already said? Because, we know the Olympics have only been cancelled twice before, during World War I and World War II. So in potentially cancelling this one, symbolically, what does this mean?
Well, I mean, as you said, David has, covered most things, but I tend to look at it a lot from an athlete's point of view because that's who I deal with. And I look at this as I understand, of course, the health imperatives. That always has to come first. I mean, health comes before sport and anything else. But I look at this as, this terrible cancellation of human dreams, because I see athletes. I've seen athletes all my life working to get to the Olympics, and, they put real life on hold. They put their academic degrees on hold. I know athletes who have mortgaged their houses. I know athletes who have put relationships on hold. There are amazing things that athletes are willing to do just to go to the Olympics, And so when this gets cancelled, something very powerful is happening to them, because I feel if you cancel it, then they often tend to get overtaken by the generation that is coming up, behind them. And so a lot of them are not going to get to the Olympics. And it's something to mourn in its own way, that this great mission of human achievement that people are attempting comes to nothing.
Right. So, guys, on one hand, going ahead with the Tokyo Olympics will mean heightened COVID-19 risks in a country that is already under a state of emergency. On the other hand, cancelling the games will mean huge losses financially. So, David, what are the options that organizers can explore that will allow the Olympics to, say, continue while keeping it safe?
Right. You have mentioned the moral dilemma there that organizers face. I was talking to World Athletics President and IOC member Lord Sebastian Coe earlier this year, and he acknowledged this as well. There are a few options. The first is, of course, universal vaccination, where the Japanese population and inbound delegates get inoculated. But with Japan only starting their national vaccination program only at the end of February, it is improbable the whole country gets vaccinated in time. Some may suggest Tokyo first, but is that morally right, that you deprive other at-risk communities from other cities and prefectures? At the same time, the IOC stance now is that it is not going to make it compulsory for athletes and visitors to be vaccinated. And some athletes have expressed their concerns about jumping the queue to get the vaccine. But relying on just previous negative tests to board the plane is not foolproof, as we have seen with positive cases at various smaller sporting events, like the upcoming Australian Open, for example. The Olympics is going to involve 11,000 athletes. So that's another quandary. Another option is for closed-door games, which the organizers have not ruled out. Obviously, the fewer people congregating, the lower the risk of community spread.
Of course. Well, David, I want to bring the conversation back to athletes, which you and Rohit have really empathized with so far. So, this whole situation of will the Olympics proceed or not, this situation, where does it leave the preparation for our local athletes? Does it put them in some sort of limbo?
Right. Let me just give you the example of our badminton players, Loh King Yew and Yeo Jia Min. They were in Thailand earlier this month. It was not the Olympic qualifiers, but it was a Thailand Open, two competitions back to back. They were there to compete, and they were holed up in their hotel rooms for a 2-week quarantine. And after that, they could leave their rooms only for training and competition. Many people's worlds have changed due to COVID, some more than most. And for the athletes, they have to get used to inactivity, which goes against their instincts as athletes. I can only imagine what it must be like to be an Olympic chasing athlete now. It's unprecedented times, how they continue to press on, like Rohit mentioned, how they continue to press on, how they continue to focus on qualifying for something that's not even certain of happening, putting themselves at an increased risk of catching the virus in doing so. I feel it's tough on them, at the same time highly admirable.
One of the things I like about athletes is that athletes are incredibly positive people. I think that's one of the things that keeps them going through all the obstacles that they face, whether it's in general life, just whether it's funding or selection or whatever, they keep going. And I think the athletes that I've spoken to, who are sort of training for the Olympics, they're still going. I mean, in their mind, they're still going to the Olympics. They're still training hard. They're still doing everything they have to do. Obviously, there are going to be issues, as David said. You can't travel to tournaments. You're not going to warm up, have as many warm-up events as you had before. It doesn't matter. In their head, they're going to do what they can to be ready for the games. If it doesn't happen, that's a different thing. But they don't want to be caught unready. You can't sort of train in the belief that, okay, I don't know. You have to be sure in your head that it's happening, and that's how you train.
Right. So on that note, I want to talk about our golden boy. How about Joseph Schooling, Rohit? If he doesn't get to defend his gold medal this year, will he have a chance in 2024?
So Joseph's going to be 26 in June. And so I think the next Olympics, he'll be 29. And age-wise, I think he's fine. I think actually Joseph has a fantastic advantage. And I think his advantage is that he's already been to the Olympics and he already has a gold medal. So he doesn't have anything to prove. So for him, it's just a question of, do I want to swim anymore? Is this important to me anymore? So I think what athletes might do, somebody like Joseph, is that maybe swim on for another year, even if the Olympics are cancelled, and maybe go to a World Championships in a year or 2 years, see what your form is, see whether you like going to the grind of practice. I think as athletes age, the thing for them is, do they want to go through the grind again? They like competing, But the traveling, the grinding, do they want to do that again? I mean, if Joseph says, no, I don't want to do it anymore, then that's fine. He got nothing to prove. But if he says, no, I like it and his form is good after a couple of years, then he might continue.
Right. So, guys, let's end off this conversation with a personal take. We have covered this situation, this dilemma of whether the Tokyo Olympics should proceed or not. So, and also, of course, the impact that it has on the athletes. So, Rohit, will Tokyo 2021 go ahead, you think?
At the moment, I would say unlikely. I want it to happen. I think it's a great, joyous celebration. But you know, the thing about the Olympics is a gathering, and I don't think a gathering is a very good idea at this moment. So I feel for the athletes, but I think public health is more important. At the moment, it looks unlikely, but we never know how fast things are going to change.
David, your thoughts on this?
Right, I think my mindset is more like the athletes. This was to be my first Olympics, covering the Olympics at the venue itself. And of course, I'm raring to go after covering our athletes for the past few years. But at the same time, we've got to realize that sport is not bigger than lives. As much as I'm okay with taking the risk myself, I don't think it's fair to make that decision on behalf of someone else if evidence suggests things are getting out of hand. In Singapore, we seem to have some control over the spread of the virus. But if Japan and Tokyo continues to see a surge, I don't think organizers should prioritize sports over health and safety. Of course, like Rohit, I'm hoping against hope that the vaccine and all the other precautionary protocol work so that resources and hard work do not go down the drain.
Right. Well, great points made on both sides. David, Rohit, thank you so much for coming on the show. We've been speaking to our colleagues at the sports desk, sports correspondent David Lee and assistant sports editor Rohit Brijnath.
Looking overseas, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine is effective across all age groups. However, Germany's vaccine committee recommended that the shot be given only to those aged 18 to 64 because there wasn't enough data yet about the vaccine's efficacy in older people. European regulators are expected to decide later today whether to approve the shot.
Tourism and trade groups in Malaysia hope the government will start discussions with Singapore to allow those who have been vaccinated to enter Malaysia without the need for quarantine. President of the Malaysia Tourist Guides Council said this is important for both countries given their interdependence, and starting such discussions early would be helpful in the recovery of the economy post-pandemic.
Shares in Top Glove jumped as much as 15% in KL today, thanks to members of the Bursa Bets Forum group on Reddit snapping up the stock.
Well, does it sound familiar to you? Because these investors are taking inspiration from American amateur traders who pushed up the prices of firms like GameStop this week. Here's Conway G. Gittins with more on the so-called frenzy stocks that rocked Wall Street.
Shares of GameStop went on a wild ride Thursday after trading app Robinhood said it was restricting trades in the gaming retailer. The stock has been at the center of a battle between small-time traders and deep-pocketed hedge funds that has shaken stocks around the world. Interactive Brokers Group said Thursday that it too had restricted trades in a number of so-called frenzy stocks like GameStop, theater chain AMC, and BlackBerry. TD Ameritrade did the same on Wednesday. Driven by an army of individual traders using online brokerage apps like Robinhood and anonymous social media messaging boards, shares of GameStop have seen a powerful 2-week surge up an eye-popping 1,700%, hammering fund investors who were betting the stock would fall. Reddit discussion groups were once again humming on Thursday as membership of the trader-focused group Wall Street Bets raced past 4 million. Veteran research analyst Michael Pachter of Wedbush Securities said the whole thing feels like a pyramid scheme.
Wall Street Bets theory is that, you know, we'll buy it at 20 and somebody will buy it from us at 30, and that happened. Then the next group bought at 30 and somebody will buy from them at 40, and it happened. Then 70, then 140, then 200, then 300. And it'll keep going up as long as demand stays high. But the question is, you know, when does that demand dissipate?
Theater chain operator AMC, which has seen ticket sales almost totally evaporate due to the health crisis, has also gone along for the ride. The stock has skyrocketed tenfold in just a matter of weeks. And it's not just U.S. companies. Several global stocks are caught up in the euphoria as well, which have only increased calls for a regulatory crackdown. Some professional market watchers say the current frenzy raises all sorts of questions with respect to possible market manipulation. But supporters of the amateur traders say these social media chat rooms and investing apps are democratizing the world of Wall Street. Thursday's trading restrictions sparked outrage on social media as locked out small investors watched shares of GameStop plunge.
Well, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Harian Tudiman with Olivia Quay. See you next week on The Big Story.